You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back, everyone, to Arsenal Pass, episode 130. And this week we'll be talking about the recent pre-release weekend of Bright Lights, answering those hard questions. What is the best hero? Is it Tekla Vossen? Do you need to open Evos to win? Is it actually 40 card minimum? Etc. But Hayden, first, how was your personal pre-release for Bright Lights? How many did you get to play and how did you go?
I played two pre-release events over the weekend. Played one on the Friday evening and then another on Sunday. I've been, as you can see from the climbing frame in the background, I've been moving. So I moved on Saturday. Well, have been moving over the week, but yeah, I got to play two pre-release events. Well, as we know, the pre-release record is the be-all and end-all of what makes you a premier Flesh and Blood player.
There's only one record to which you can publicly post to Twitter, and that is undefeated.
Exactly. Well, I went 7-1, so I clearly can't be posting on Twitter. So
don't talk about it. Don't say that.
I'll make sure to not. The first rule of not XOing is don't talk about it. Second rule of not XOing is don't talk about it, Brendan. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun. I think, when we did the set review last week, it got me really amped up for finally playing some limited. Mm-hmm. I'm super excited to play draft. That's probably my number one thing I'm super excited about, just because that's the format that we're going to play a majority of. But sealed is relevant, and there is some sealed events coming up this year, or potential sealed events coming up this year, depending on where you land on days at events. But yeah, I didn't get to play Dash. I really, really wanted to play Dash at the pre-release weekend. I had a couple of friends who had opened up enough items and played Dash decks and had good sort of fun and some good results. I ended up playing Tekla Vossen on the Friday and then Max on the Sunday. But honestly, I feel like my Tekla Vossen deck, had I maybe understood the format a little bit better, could have probably been a Dash deck at a stretch. And then my deck on Sunday was probably maybe a Tekla Vossen deck, but I really wanted to play Max and try out some different strategies, which we'll talk about around fatigue and people's discussion around Tekla Vossen being Tekla Daddy in this format. Anyway, how was your pre-release?
So I played two as well. My first pre-release was I opened a Max deck, which means that I did not open Evos and I did not open enough items or good items to play Dash. So Dash really wasn't on the table for that deck. And then, it just looked like a Max deck at that point. Maybe it could have been a Tekla Vossen deck in the end, but I played Max. My first match was against a absolutely busted Tekla Vossen deck, and that was the first match I played the format. So my sort of initial impression of the format was just getting railed by turn 4, 3 Evos out, already charging up the weapon. Soon the 4th Evo came out. You had 4 unique slots, and I was just like, wow, this is trash. And then I proceeded to actually play against, other reasonably powered decks, and it was okay. Max was okay. I didn't find Max to be particularly enjoyable to play. I think I would have been rather playing the Tekla Vossen. I did try out 30 card, just play my best cards 30 card in my last match, and I did get fatigued, but to be fair, I absolutely missequenced a turn. It was a small mistake, but that's enough when you kind of work on those razor thin margins. You're trying to beat something like a fatigue strategy. But yeah, I was playing that Max deck. So my second pre-release, I opened an absolutely busted Tekla Vossen deck. So I had 6 Evos and I had the 4 unique slots. So it was ridiculous. It didn't feel very fair, to be honest. I was doing exactly what my opponent did to me in that first round, which is, boosting away my Evos and playing them out of Banish Zone, blocking with them, scrapping them. It was just, that strategy just felt super, super powerful. So second deck felt good. First deck felt medium, and I definitely could have gone 2-1 with the first deck, but I went 1-2, and I think that part of that was due to the misplay and also just experimenting with different card counts, because, when I first walked up to pre-release, I was just like, okay, so 40 card minimum. And everybody was like, yes, absolutely 40 card minimum. We played before. Don't even consider it. And then I was talking with you all in the group chat, and you're like, no, maybe it's 36, 38. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to get the data point. I'm going to play 30 and see how that feels.
Minimum.
Yeah, I'm going to play the minimum, see how it feels. So I was just testing around. I mean, that's what pre-release is for, ultimately. But yeah, I think it's a cool set. I really like the Evo mechanic. It's just really cool because Flesh and Blood is a game where I think that Flesh and Blood's greatest strength is its resource system, the attack values, the block value, and how it's also balanced. But I also think that it's its greatest weakness as well in terms of design, because it kind of limits where we can go and kind of where design can go. And, the team continually impresses me with sort of where they're able to stretch the boundaries, and Evos are an expression of that. They're like a new way to sort of interact with the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the Evos, and I think I really like the interaction limited of being both, which we did initially miss when we spoke about this last week. But both being equipment and actions or instants, depending on what it is. But basically, how they play into overpower when blocking from hand. So if you do have a deck chock full of them, but also what that means for not being able to just basically, I guess, the power level of cards like overpower, and also I think the power level of cards like items, which I think I definitely kind of missed in our set review, just how this format would actually play out. And I definitely felt that on Friday with my first pre-release, was a bit surprised at kind of just the strength of some items in particular. Mm-hmm. And then also just kind of how you can really set up game states to utilize either overpower or potentially punish Evos in a certain way. I don't know. I definitely feel like I learned a lot across the weekend as to the kind of interaction of Evos, their power level. And don't get me wrong, like I think, you open like a really good Tekla deck, like it is very, very good. But I also felt the same about like a couple of dash decks I saw. I think it's harder to, because you need more specific items as opposed to just any number of particular Evos, less specific Evos. And then on the Max side, I don't know, I really enjoyed playing Max on Sunday. I thought the play patterns were kind of interesting. I think I watched people on Friday play Max, and I felt like I learned like what not to do. I saw people like just boosting and like then activating the ability, as opposed to like on Sunday, I think I had like 8 like reasonable items in my deck, or 8 or 9 reasonable items, and was just utilizing like Crank a lot more and sort of powering it out that way. So I really like the play patterns with Max. I thought it was quite interesting, and I really like Banksy. I think it's such a cool weapon, and if you can interact with the weapon in ways to buff it and pump it and start to get value off Crank, there's some really crazy stuff you can do, especially setting up some really big setup turns to punish people who are actively trying to fatigue in this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that the Crank items are pretty critical to Max decks. What items in particular did you find to sort of exceed your initial evaluation of them? Like, which ones stood out for you?
I mean, you're right. Definitely the Crank items. I was actually going back through our list from last week. I think in particular one that we got quite wrong was like the backup protocols. I think those we gave like a D grade, I think, to, or like a C minus, and I think those are like very, very good and very important, especially for Dash, but also for Max, and even to a degree Tekla. I think there is definitely more of an element of fatigue than I maybe thought. Like slightly less. I knew there was going to be an element of fatigue because there's a lot of 3 blocks. It's a mix hit. They're limiting the card limit to 40 for a reason.
They signposted it.
Yeah. But I think these ways to power back out your best overpower cards, ways to get back particularly important cards in turn sequences, or just get Crank and then use the value of your extra resource to get like a 1 cost back or a 0 cost back, and still be able to do things like attack with Banksy, for instance, and Max. Mm-hmm. Those were some of the ones that stood out for me. And then I think in Dash in particular, like the loop items, Fuel Injector, Med Kit, and Steam Canister. Mostly Steam Canister. Steam Canister is a pretty crazy card that you can do some pretty nuts stuff with because of the Crank interaction. And some of these Crank items are really powerful, whether it's cards like Penetration Script, for instance. So or even the Red Script when you set it up with Overpower. The I forgot the name of it. The one that gives Overpower is really good.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that overall my impression of items on the weekend is I think we definitely rated some low, but I still found them to be a little bit weak in the sense that I feel like Max and Dash jump through hoops to obtain power level, where Tekla sort of free rolls it with the Evos. I think that Evos having the modality of being able to be boosted, being able to be blocked with, and then scrapped for an additional benefit, and still being able to be played out of hand, just gave them a lot more flexibility than the other strategies. Especially Dash, I think, because Dash is also punished with the 18 life total, and runs the risk of running those items in the deck, having 2 in hand, and then suffering a lot of damage on turns where they maybe get a bit unlucky. I just feel like Tekla didn't have a lot of downside, but definitely variable on how many Evos you open. I felt that the hero was a cut above when it opened a critical mass of Evos and could equip 3 to 4 in a game. It felt very, very powerful to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's always going to be the case, right? I think I'm interested to see how draft plays out. Yeah. I think in sealed, I think it's perfectly fine to have a hero that is kind of like semi the default. We have in other sealed formats before, And I think it's nice that when you open seal pools that can support the other heroes, that you feel empowered and able to play those. I would say that Max and Dash, my kind of takeaway is that they have more complicated play patterns. I think there is more deck building decisions with those heroes than there is with Teklavossen. And I think it's week one, well, not even, it's week 0 of the format, right? And the pre-release weekend. And I think that potentially takes time for people to, master and get their head around. And I definitely felt by the end of the weekend that, I still have a lot to learn about how I would build, particularly Dash, and get to play with it. But even Max, like after I was continually changing my Max deck on Sunday. I had about sort of 46 cards that I thought could have been in the deck. Was fluctuating between like 37 to 40 and just changing out cards quite a lot. So yeah, I still think there's a lot to learn. I think the items, I just think the items are very surprising, actually. And I think there's a lot of ones that I want to revisit and their interaction in Limited, I think.
Yeah, interesting. So I found myself, I found myself not making what I would describe as not making any deck building decisions when building Teklavossen. It felt like crack shuffle play, take out yellows, take out a lot of the items, and that was sort of the deck, and you land where you land with the Evos. Max felt a bit, I felt similar to me, but I guess wasn't in execution, because like I said, I was taking cards in and out, I was changing card count, etc. But did still feel like when I came down to cutting cards, I was looking directly at the yellow slot, like what yellows can I take out of my deck, and then usually what items that don't have crank would I want to be taking out here. That sort of, it felt like, I want to ask you a core question of this format, which is, do you feel that this format is 40 card minimum? The actual rules of it, by the way, if you're not aware, is 30 card minimum, 40 card maximum. But the sort of meme on the weekend, which is obviously, early impressions, is 40 card minimum or close to that. How do you feel about deck count in the format? And do you think that it is more correct than not to usually be playing 40 cards?
I don't know if it's more correct. I think that's going to be something we have to discover as the format goes on. This is what I will say, is that I think right now, if you're playing the seal format and we're learning and developing kind of the strategies and approach to it, I think your default should be 40 cards. I think that's where you should start. But I think you should not play bad cards in your deck. I think that is true. And I think there's some cards, that I was like, on the surface of it, like for instance, I had Teklavossen, right, on Friday, and I'm like, Red Hyperdriver, what a card, right? This card seems so good in this format. Card sucks in Teklavossen. Like, it's so, you're spending your action points and your time of setup to either put on some pressure to take cards from them, so you can trade up on cards, right? And you can boost and scrap, or you're putting Evos into play and then attacking with your weapons. So, and trying to get to a particular game state where you can, like, it has this like start empty. It's like the opposite of Fab, right? Teklavossen. He's like start empty, end full, right? With the kind of Evo power and your Tickler leveler. So, a card like Hyperdrive, for instance, amazing in Max, really, really strong in Dash, but not good in Teklavossen in my view.
Yeah.
So I think it's all those, like, that's why I think there is, like, people saying there's no deck building decisions in this format. I think that's not true. And to be fair, my understanding is that's like a minority have kind of been, want for a better term, shitting on the format so far. Not been my experience. Everyone's got different experiences when it comes to pre-release weekend, and their matches go differently. And I played like my first 3 games, and I was like, oh, this format looks really cool and super interesting. And I immediately just wanted to play as much of each of the heroes as I could. And I know not everyone had that experience on the weekend, so it's going to be individualistic, right? Like, no one's going to walk away from any pre-release weekend and be like, oh, love this game, love this set, had a great experience. Because first of all, some people are going to lose. Second of all, some people are going to open like nothing of value potentially.
People don't give enough credit to the whole how losing affects their impression of the format.
I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. Third, I think, is also, hey, we know that winning and fun,
card games, directly correlated.
Usually exclusive. I've lost my point. Right. I guess, the kind of deep decision thing. I think if you're going to go back to 40 cards, I think your default is 40 cards. Take out your bad cards, take out cards. So for instance, like in Max, I felt like I wanted closer to 40. I was looking at people's Dash decks and I was like, and again, I haven't played Dash, I'm only observing this from the other side. Yeah. I was like, I feel like I want slightly less cards to increase the density of my like item hits. And I have this kind of in-game loop to kind of manage against fatigue with, something like a canister, for instance, if I have that rare. So maybe I'm more on like 36 cards. My Teklavossen deck, I was playing like 36, 37, and like people with 40, like, they were they were fatiguing before me because they just had worse cards in the deck, for instance, if it came down to fatigue, if they were like blocking out a lot.
Yeah,
so
it's funny how biased the different pools are towards cards that overperformed you. So some cards that overperformed for me, and these cards are kind of win more, I guess, are the Evo upgrade cards. Dude, I did some seriously unfair stuff with Evo upgrade cards, both with heavy artillery and liquid cooled mayhem.
You had heavy artillery? I mean, yeah, that's a rare for a reason.
Yeah. That card is so good. And liquid cooled mayhem was really doing the more unfair stuff because I was casting it for 0 for 6 and blocks 3. Pretty good. So those cards were insane for me, but they go hand in hand with like already having Evos, which I think is really good. The fundamental of the format for me and why I sort of side on Teklevossen being the most powerful deck, even after sort of trying to have like a bit of a retrospective, think with the years, I feel like Dash and Max Nitro jump through hoops for power, and I feel like Teklevossen does not. Like Teklevossen just inherently has power and is getting a sort of, I don't know, a somewhat free roll on these Evos because they can be banished. And by the way, we'll talk about the strategies for each hero, but I think that a lot of people are playing Teklevossen incorrectly. Like, I think this idea that you play 40 cards and try to fatigue people with Teklevossen by playing defensively is absolutely incorrect. I think Teklevossen is more of a mid-range to aggressive deck because of the way those Evos interact with scrapping them from graveyard, playing them out of Banish Zone, boosting them away, playing from Banish Zone. Those are the most powerful things you can do is when you get that card for free. But yeah, the Evo upgrade cards were absolutely disgusting for me. I also had a mechanical strength as well. It was just like, it was nuts.
Also rare.
Yeah, also rare. Yeah, I know. I had a good pool. I had a really good pool. Which, to be fair, I was on the other side of that in my first game. On the weekend. Yeah,
you felt it and then you got it. Look, I will not disagree. I think Evo upgrade, Evo's very, very powerful. I will disagree a little bit on, I guess, like Teklevossen just like not having to jump through hoops. I mean, your weapon starts and it does literally 0, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't see an Evo in the first couple of turns, you do have to be on like defensive duty, and it's really hard for you to gain value. Like, you can do some boosting, but if you get too low in life and then you can't play Evos, your deck kind of doesn't function the way it needs to. So I think there is kind of some balance there. And yes, I think if people aren't able to punish you for taking turns off to play Evos, I think there's a flip side of that. Like, I'm just going to play devil's advocate a little bit. I don't completely disagree with you on like Teklevossen's power in this format. I also don't completely agree. I'm not as far along as you are. Definitely not as far along as some others are. But for instance, like if you flip into Teklevossen and this is the kind of strategy is people are going to try and trade value early, get their Evos into play and keep their life total a reasonable amount so that they can kind of take over the late game and late game, and you present 40 cards and don't build your deck to be able to present big turns and punish them, then you're probably going to lose that. But that's just bad deck building and a bad fundamental approach to the game. If when I flipped Max into Teklevossen, like I was going down a couple of cards and I was making sure that like my priority in the game was like setting up like a boom grenade that they couldn't block, for instance, or setting up like a Hadron Collider and passing and then moving into like a 20 damage turn to punish them. Because if they're gonna take turns off to play or take 2 cards off from their hand and defending to play Evos, like I want to be able to punish that. And obviously, yes, they can just flip out. Like on turn 3, I think I had 4 Evos as Teklevossen in one game, right? And obviously that's disgusting. Like that is going to happen.
Pretty good.
But I think there is a flip side to it, which is there is play to other heroes, and I think people are overlooking that. That's kind of all I want to point out.
I have to give some credence to like I don't have hands-on experience with like a mid Teklevossen deck. It was just kind of a bust. So for instance, like I never the way you described taking turns off to play Evos, that never occurred to me. I was always doing busted shit and playing Evos in the same turn.
Boosting, scrapping, Evoing.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Never actually lost tempo to play an Evo, which is where I think they're the most powerful, but obviously that that leads into you having a lot of them. But yeah, the Teklevossen deck, I would be interested to see. There's a dichotomy between like what is a mid-level Teklevossen deck and why is that not a Max Nitro deck? Like when are those, like when does that shift? Like when do you go from this sort of bad Teklevossen deck and become a Max deck or become a Dash deck? Because I don't think that just opening 4 packs and absolutely forcing Teklevossen no matter what is correct, which in the past in some sealed formats people have tried to do that with heroes like Prism, for instance, or like Briar, for instance. Like if we go back to Tales of Aria, I mean, people can shit on this format all they want, but if we go back to other sealed formats, if you think that Tekla-Vossen is forcible, default, not a lot of deck building decisions, let me take you back to Tales of Aria. Tales of Aria.
Those formats were much worse. Yeah. That format was like actively often correct. Like I would say, I'm just gonna put a number on it. I think probably 50% of pools should probably be Tekla-Vossen pools. It's probably around where I think it is at the moment. I'll let you know next week if I think that's still true. And then I think right now though, people are like 75, 80% Tekla-Vossen. Well, at least in the Twitter circles, right? And obviously that's a lot more of a specific kind of what's the word I'm looking for when there's a lot of discussion. It's an echo chamber a little bit, right? So I want to point out like some cards quickly. I know we're going to talk about cards and heroes and archetypes and stuff and draft and kind of limited overall, but for instance, like some people were pointing out like the boost card and saying, oh, these cards are really similar, they don't necessarily do a lot in the format. And then I'm playing a Tekla-Vossen and I just play Lay Waste and my opponent's like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, this card says can't be defended by equipment. They're like, oh, but I want to block with my Evos, and also I have another in my hand. Oh, yeah.
No, that's a piece of equipment.
Bad luck.
Yeah. I actually I didn't encounter a scenario where that text was relevant to me. I think it's because my Tekla-Vossen deck was broken.
You just pounding on them?
Yeah, I wasn't blocking. I don't know how much I was blocking. It's just like, oh, I hate you for 15 because this is a 0 for 6 go. But yeah, I did, in my max deck, it didn't end up becoming relevant because, like I said, it kind of got destroyed. Then I played someone on Dash.io and then I got fatigued. But, speaking of evasion, that heavy artillery, baby, that's a good card. Holy shit, man. That card is so good. It's just like, oh, I play this card, I win the game 5 Evos. I want to ask you, in terms of the sort of macro of how this format plays out, I know that the pervasive word that exists on Twitter, and I think in a lot of circles, is fatigue. How do you feel that fatigue plays into the format? Do you think it is a primary strategy of the format? Do you think that most games go to fatigue? Or do you feel like, fatigue is being overhyped and it's a bit of a misconception when it comes to Bright Light's Seal?
It's an interesting one because I don't think standard fatigue is a strategy. And we talked about in Outsiders Limited a lot about fatigue by damage, and this format has a very kind of similar element to it, and it really comes down to games will end in fatigue. Is it a reasonable primary strategy? I don't particularly think so. I think that's going to open the door to playing, if you have that mindset of playing bad cards and defending in bad ways and taking poor value, and you'll probably end up getting fatigued because most people are going to play 40 cards like we just talked about, right? I think that's going to be default. So if you hit into the game plan of like, I'm going to fatigue by blocking, you're probably going to fatigue. If you hit into the game plan of like, I'm going to trade value and get the most out of this game, and you and your opponent are also blocking really efficiently to keep life totals high, then the game will often go to fatigue, I think, especially in Tekla-Vossen mirrors, as well as some others like Max vs. Tekla or whatever it is, even Dash, etc. So I don't think it's necessarily like the default or a good primary strategy. It's a result of the game happening and of people playing in efficient ways in the game. Now, there is things outside that we just talked about, right? Which is this idea of like setting up turns, using items, because like putting items into play, you can effectively play 6-7 card hands, right? So if you can do that and get value out of them, then great. You can play 6-7 card hands. You can break the average value of turns, because it is quite hard to break the average damage value in this format, actually, despite having boost and all this. It's actually quite hard. You need a lot of red boost cards, for instance, to be able to do that, and you need a lot of the really efficient ones to be able to do that. For instance, if you have a blue and then 3 of the reds that cost 1 that attack for 4, that's still only 12 damage, right? So you're not breaking the cycle there. The way you break cycle... Exactly. The way you break cycle is with... five cards obviously can go above that, but the way you break the cycle is with items. It's with these like Evo upgrade cards. It's obviously with Evos themselves. That's why people go to it. It's by utilizing turns that utilize your weapon, blocking with 2 cards, using 2 cards to come back for 6, and then pushing more damage from Arsenal, for instance. So I think just going back to it, I don't think it's like the default strategy. I think it's not even necessarily a reasonable strategy to just be like hard blocking fatigue, but I think fatigue is a result of the format, and it will happen still a reasonable amount for sure.
Yeah, I think a word I would use to describe it is a fallacy, right? Where like fatigue is happening. It's a big part of a lot of the games, but if you go into Bright Light Seal assuming that you're going to fatigue people as a primary strategy, where you're assuming you're going to block them out, like I just think that you're not going to beat most competent players. The fatigue in this format is similar to the fatigue in Outsiders, where it's just fatigued by damage and blocking, right? I mean, like you said, I mean, I don't know if Flesh and Blood is just going to be like this moving forward, because it's part of just the player base getting better, and I feel like this sort of this cognizant sort of elevation of the player base, but this exchange of value, right, that just goes on through the game. It's like if you just outvalue your opponent throughout the game, you probably win. That just kind of feels like that's how Sealed plays out, even like with the Teklevossen. That's why Teklevossen is so powerful, is because Evos represent value that sort of exceed the standard curve of like normal hands. But yeah, so fatigue.
That's actually true. Like, that's so true though. Like, that is what it is, right? It's like Sealed is probably the most fundamental damage trading format in Flesh and Blood, right? So the default is to do that. And some decks will have the capability to go outside of that and play more atypical turns, right? But you have to, that's harder work. You have to have different cards, particularly for it. And, you know, it's not always going to go your way because the consistency of the cards might not fall. So it's such an interesting one, I think.
I think that is just going to be like how most Flesh and Blood sets will play out. I mean, like we talked, it's core to the design of Flesh and Blood. It's why the game is so good when you initially play it. But like, it does limit the. I don't know if it's definitely not the micro play patterns like turn to turn, but it's like the macro, right? Where it really is like if you're playing a 40 card deck, even a 30 card deck, you know, over X turns or N turns, if you exceed X quantitative or Y quantitative point of your opponent consistently, like you should just win that game. Like you will just win that game. They'll run out of cards. If you're playing equal cards, they will die by damage because if you start at the same life, etc. And like Sealed just is a great expression of that. And yeah, again, that's why I default on Teklevossen with the Evos, is because we're just breaking that curve a bit by banishing Evos and playing them for free or scrapping, right? Like Junkyard Dog, like what the, like I just blocked with my Evo. Now I Junkyard Dog it. I two card 7 and then I play it out of banish zone. It's crazy.
I have some questions for you about the format. I guess my first thing is, before we jump into, I guess, just limited overall, because I want to take a step back, do a bit of a re-review of kind of our top level analysis of the cards in the format. We're not going to go through every card, but just kind of our general view on the cards. I know I already talked about items, and I have some questions for you about the feel of the format, and then we can talk about draft. Is there anything else that you kind of want to take a step back on this week? Look at, I mean, I do just want to quickly plug Taipei and Dallas are both coming up. Callings. Taipei is next weekend. It's the weekend. So release is this weekend coming. Super excited to get my hands. I'm going to be doing some drafting, playing some Classic Constructed. Taipei is next weekend. I'll be there. Dallas is the following weekend, which you will be there.
You were supposed to be there.
It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to make it now. There's still a slim chance I get to Dallas. I'm gonna try, but it's work is not. It's hard at the moment.
So what was your question for me? And some
just anything else to add, or that you want to talk about before we kind of go really deep on Bright Lights Limited and we get tunnel visioned and probably don't talk about anything else for the rest of the episode.
Yeah. I think I've said it a few times already in this podcast, which is I think in a format like this, like while Dash, IO, and Max are fully competent heroes, fully capable of going undefeated at your pre-release and you're posting on Twitter, etc. I just think that the default deck, and we could talk about like 50% played or maybe a little bit more, is probably Teklevossen, because Teklevossen, in my opinion, with the correct supporting cards, whether it's opening Evos, opening cards that allow you to scrap, boosting, you know, relevant boost cards so you can boost those Evos into Banish Zone. I find that Teklevossen is just not jumping through nearly as many hoops to attain power, and it kind of just happens by playing out a normal game plan. I think that the incorrect thing to do with Teklevossen is to play 40 cards and assume you're just going to block all the time. You're going to play your Evo out of hand, take turns off. Like, that strategy is just so bad. Like, you should be just boosting, blocking the 2 cards, boosting a bid, playing the Evo for free out of your Banish Zone, playing a 2 for 7, scrapping it, then playing it out of your Banish Zone, and then you're assembling like this Exodia and your equipment. Now your weapon is a 1 for 3, maybe it's even a 1 for 3 to go again. Then you're doing, 1 for 3 plus threat as you get into the late game. Like, that I think is the most just sort of base powerful strategy. And if you're looking, if you're looking to go play Sealed and you're like, what's an easier way to win? I think that if you've opened the correct cards, that's all you got to do. So basically, I went to the first pre-release with my partner, and she hasn't played Flesh and Blood in years. And the cards are aesthetically and the way they're written, they're very complex, but I put the cards in front of her. I said, you block with 2 cards, you play out 1 card, then you're gonna block with these Evo cards, or you're gonna boost them, and then you're gonna scrap them, and then you're just gonna play them. That's all you're gonna do, and you will just win the game. And like that is a good sort of Pareto on the format. The 80-20 competency is like literally just play the Tekla deck and get value out of the Evos, and you will beat most decks. Because most, we'll see as the format grows and matures, but most decks on pre-release, like you talked about, were built very inefficiently, very badly. Like people didn't really have their game plans at the forefront of like why they built their deck. What are they trying to do? They just sort of get this inkling that fatigue is a thing, Tekla is good, dash, items, and, they kind of just default to these strategies that aren't very linear and sort of concentrated.
Yeah. By the way, check that one off your bingo card.
Oh God, there's probably a lot.
The 80-20, baby.
The 80-20.
Yeah. And it just comes down to you play fundamental flesh and blood for those first few turns of the game. And like I think you pointed out exactly how you should play Tekla in this format.
Yeah. Fundamental card games, actually. It's I've been going through this phase, now being exposed to a lot more card games. The card games are actually like they have this full sense of narrative and context that exists on the board, in your hand, and your deck. And all this narrative that is weaved through the card design, the art, but the actual thing the only thing that matters is just value, right? Just out 2-for-1ing your opponent, out damaging them in something like Flesh and Blood, and like you will just win a vast majority of the games if you focus on the strict fundamentals of just outvaluing your opponent. Like context almost is completely irrelevant, or almost. That's kind of a misnomer, but yeah.
I want to give, you've given a bit of a cheat sheet on building Tekla in the Sealed. I want to do the same for Max and Datadol quickly. I just want to make a Datadol. -IO.
Yeah.
Datadol for Intellect, I wish. But just quickly before we jump into that, Brendan, do you know the Living Legend format is returning for Worlds?
Yeah. Is there a ban list?
So they've just published an article. I hadn't seen it. Obviously, we knew because they dropped an event on the event page saying it's coming back. It sounds like all adult hero signature weapons are legal. They're kicking off with an empty ban list so you can harness the limitless power of your deck. They even say tap into the true power of Rune Chance and Bloodteeth Scalata. So
I'll tell you what the most powerful deck is. You can literally go net deck or chain deck from like the Calling Vegas.
No.
That's better than the Viscera deck, surely.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
100%.
It definitely wouldn't. My chain deck wouldn't look like that.
It might lose to Starvo, but no, I think it's. Yeah, I guess there's maybe some additions.
Awakening's legal, man.
Fuck that card, man.
Have you seen Sonata? The new Sonata?
Yeah. So you think let's go on a tangent because it's fun. What hero do you think you'd be playing in that format if you played?
Well, funny you asked that. I think we're going to try and record some gameplay of
Living Legend
format. Yeah, I think that's on the cards. So, I've got to play. Like, I want to play Viscerai. Like, obviously, like being a Viscerai guy, that's where I want to go. I want to play some Viscerai with Scalata, obviously. I think Awakening is super powerful, right? I wonder if. I think Starvo Awakening is also really powerful. Briar with Ball Lightning. Obviously, it has the errata still.
I don't think it beats Starvo, though, to be honest. I think that Starvo
with Ball Lightning?
Yeah. I don't know about that. But Starvo is an interesting addition to the game because even for things like, I know Chain actually won the Pro Tour that Starvo was, in Pro Tour number 1. But the thing that Starvo does is it really derails a lot of those aggressive decks because it's not only is it hitting you for a shitload of damage, and pardon my French, but it's also disrupting you with Spinal Crush and discard 2, and it's tough to play a deck. But I still think that Chain, like the Chain deck that we used to play, because you do keep the 1 or 2 resource cards in hand and you banish the 3-4 cards, it could still be powerful, but I think Starvo will probably be the best deck. That being said, Starvo has a bad matchup in the Prism. The Living Legend format is it's interesting, actually. It's a really interesting format.
Yeah, Starvo's matchup with Prism isn't that bad. I don't know. It's gonna be an interesting one. I think my eyes are definitely on Viscerai. I would like to play a little bit of Prism again, probably for about 3 games, then throw that away. And I would like to revisit Starvo, like through the lens of current Flesh and Blood and also some of the cards that we have access to. So,
one thing I'll say is if you're playing Prism into Starvo and you do find that they have any percent chance to beat you, you can add a card called Library of Solana to your deck, and they will concede on the spot. That card is so freaking unbeatable for Starvo. It's hilarious. We tested this a lot with me and Michael Hamilton actually back in the day, because Michael Hamilton was basically the only Starvo that had been kind of beating me on Prism. I was just like, how the fuck is he doing this? This was before I knew Michael Hamilton was the phenom that he is. So I added in Library of Solana, and that card is this is the what is that slot called? What is that slot? The Fable. Yeah, the Fable, right? Yeah, that card is like auto concede for Starvo. If you need any equity, one sideboard card's crazy.
Well, I'm definitely excited to play a bit of Living Legend. I'm hoping it's going to be at some LGSs near me and I can go and try out some Living Legend format. Excited to see what people... It's because it's this kind of like almost like underground format, right? Like it's not one that's going to get a lot of attention because it's not big events. There's obviously this event at Worlds.
It's going to get attention, I think, actually.
Well, it will get attention, but I just don't know if it's, it's not going to be as refined and because the first event is this Battle Hardened at Worlds, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if stores can even run Living Legend before that, but like, I mean, I want to play some Living Legend, so... Yeah,
Living Legend format is just the antithesis of the modern, or the current age of Flesh and Blood. Like the heroes that are in Living Legend are so absurdly beyond the power level of what currently goes on in Flesh and Blood. I mean, Lexi's pretty strong, but yeah, like we don't do stuff like Starvo or Chain or Prism anymore, or even Viscerai with Scalata. Like that stuff just does not happen in the game anymore. So I actually think that Living Legend format will excite a lot of people, because even people that didn't play back then, and I know that some of those heroes are pretty recent, they've heard the murmurs, right? They've heard about the Chain decks and the Starvo decks, and those
Seeds of Agonies.
Yeah, I mean, those cards are crazy. Yeah. Personally, those are some of my favorite cards in Flesh and Blood. I think Starvo is a giant pile of garbage, but outside of that, I mean, Living Legend has a lot of my favorite heroes and cards.
Yep. Just lastly, quickly, ProQuest Season 4, if you are in Australia, I guess, because we have two callings, well, like not access to two callings close to us, but anyway, Australia starts next weekend, October 14th. Everyone else is October 21st to November 5th. Good luck at ProQuest season. It's a mix of draft and class constructed. I'm going to try and play, I think there's one draft one I can play, Brennan, one class constructed. Are you heading out for ProQuest season 4? You be in stores playing?
I will not, but there's definitely a reason for that, which we'll talk about later.
Okay, sure.
There's I don't know. I just can't. I mean, obviously, you can probably assume why, but probably. I mean, I might make it out if there's like a local store, but I'm not going to be grinding and traveling for it. For a reason. You can.
We don't know what this ProQuest season is qualifying for, but it will be for the first Pro Tour of next year. So, very exciting. All right, I want to quickly talk about Max and my experience with Max, and I think kind of you talked about a little cheat sheet on building yourself a Teklo Daddy. You want to build yourself a Max. I think the first thing that you're looking for is you look to your red boost cards. Obviously, you can get some power here. You're looking for specifically what your red boost cards are, though, as well. I think people have looked and been like, I have X amount of red boost cards. I'm going to play Max. I think you're looking for a combination of some of particular red boost cards, some particular items as well, which we'll talk about, especially ones that say crank on them. And then you are looking for the pumps, actually. Like, pumps are really good as well. And then you're looking for, like, some ways to win the game. So a couple of overpower cards are great ways to win the game, especially when you combine them with pumps. Backup protocol red, for instance, is a crank item that can also get you back a win condition, or even the yellow if it's a yellow overpower card. So these are kind of the cards I'm looking for. I mean, Hyperdrive is obviously really good. In terms of when it comes to, like, the red boost cards that you're looking for, like, you are looking for these cards that particularly interact with equipment or go back to the bottom of your deck. So Underloop, Overloop, very good. Panel Beater, Fender Bender, these are the ones that get plus X attack for each equipment defending it. And then also Lay Waste, which is the card that can't be defended by equipment. These cards, and Outpace, sorry, that's the 1 cost versus the 2 cost. These cards are particularly very good in Max, especially when you're dealing with Tekla Vossen. A lot of the time you'll see cards like Expedite and Med-X and Dumpster Dive, etc. These cards are definitely better in Dash, for instance. There is these boost cards all have slightly different, better homes, I think, because they're all kind of on rate. You're paying let's look at Dumpster Dive, for instance. It's a 1-for-4 with boost, and if an item or equipment was banished from boosting, it gets +1. So at base, it's like a 1-for-4, and in some decks, it's going to be a 1-for-5, right? If it's a 1-for-4 and you're spending a 1-for-4 go again, and you're also losing a card from your deck, like that is on rate. Like that card is not, those cards aren't gonna, a combination of all these boost cards at 1-for-4 are not gonna win you the game. You need other cards. So I think just recognizing how important certain boost cards are in decks is really important. And then I think the other thing you're then looking at, also overall, just like cards like Big Bertha and Gas Guzzler and some of these higher damage boost cards are really good. Mm-hmm. Jumpstart, obviously, really, really good in max for the other red boost cards you're looking for. And then you're looking for some of these pumps. So cards like Gigawatt, Gas Up, the ones that interact with particularly the one, well, it works on your weapon, which is fantastic because pumping your weapon is great. Such a good breakpoint for it. But also the ones that interact with hyperdrivers are great. And then items. I want to talk about crank items that I think you should be looking for. So I talked about Backup Protocol Red. I think that's a good way to get back some of your win conditions. I'm not going to talk about rares because most of the rares are just good, but like a card like Soup Up is really good in max. All the gets a buff if an item's been destroyed because you can destroy hyperdrivers so easily. They're all really good. But yeah, items, hyperdriver. I think you can use cards like Overload Script for in-game setups. Hadron Collider is really good. Boom Grenade, obviously, also very good as well. So you just have to make sure you're setting that up. And then Penetration Script. Those are the cards in particular that, like, from an item standpoint, I'm looking for, and then I'm trying to chuck them all together and build me a max.
Yeah, I think that people are currently underrating how important Crank is to actually activate. If you're not turning on the weapon, like, I think you're playing a bad deck compared to like a Tekla Lawson deck.
So this is, and then I just want to talk about play patterns. So if you're playing, 3-4 card hands and you're going pitch my blue, boost my attack, so play an on-rate card that also takes a card out of my deck, then I make my hyperdriver, and then I'm coming in with my my weapon off cranking it. If you do that every turn of the game, you are going to lose. That is not like efficient. That is not, people will be able to fatigue you. They'll block one card on your weapon, one card on your boost attack, and they've lost 2 cards, you've lost 2 cards, but then they get to come in with their 2-card hand, right? It's not particularly great, to be honest, because you're only presenting 7 damage, but you're losing, like I say, two cards out of your deck. So I think if that's what you're doing every turn, that's really hard to get above rate, and you're going to struggle to win the game when the deck on the opposing side is eventually going to amass like a much better weapon and evos than you. So you have to be able to set up and push damage. Mm-hmm. So crank super important for that, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Like, I just think that Crank, like I said, is critical to the max deck. Like, I think people went into playing max not valuing the weapon highly enough, and just thought that I have a lot of red boost cards, so I'm going to be playing max, and I have these boost cards that are, they look like they have synergy with hyperdrivers, but that's not enough. Like, max needs to be utilizing the weapon, or it's just
have ways to win the game as well. Have ways to finish off damage. Like, Overpower is so good because if Tekla Lawson is like getting to an in-game state where they are trading life to set up evos in the in-game, Overpower is the best way to punish that. Overpower the pump, for instance.
Yeah. There's a part of me with like the Tekla Lawson and like setting up evos in the end game versus just like free rolling them off the top is like
of course. Yeah.
I'm more in the latter category. I want to ask you,
and that's like
Max,
you've got the Tekla Lawson deck. Sorry,
I want to ask you something with Max though, which is activating the ability. How do you tend to use the hero ability? Do you use it and always crank it? Do you ever use it after you have go again and then save it for the next turn? Right, get the value over 2 turns. Like, how are you utilizing that? I forget the token he creates. It's hyperdriver. Yeah, the hyperdriver token. How do you find yourself utilizing it most often?
I would say I was finding I was utilizing the hero ability less than most of my opponents, I would say, just in general. I was definitely relying a lot more on crank to kind of set up turns. But when I was using it, I would say, a chunk of the time, I don't know how much of the time, be hard to say, but definitely a chunk of the time, I was not cranking it. Like, I would do it as my last action and passing and trying to set up towards these big turns, especially if I was heading towards second cycle and I knew my setup was coming, for instance. Or I had a card that I wanted to arsenal and then set up a big turn for next turn, for instance, and wanted to make sure I could then get that resource for the turn after as well, or use it for something like Galvanize, for instance, when it gets to 1 counter. So there was definitely like a real kind of chop and change. I honestly think like Max is one of like maybe it might be the hardest to play, and it feels counterintuitive. It feels like it should be the easiest to play, but I actually think it's the hardest to play.
You have to do so much math, dude. You actually have to do so much math. Like sometimes when you're sort of trying to map out like the hyperdriver, activating, plus you have like one of the equipments that you can put down, because like it's not that clean. Because sometimes when you're boosting cards, you're out of cards and you can't activate the equipment piece. It's like the arm piece where you can pay a resource and then get 2 resources. It's kind of like the pseudo Tekla Foundry. There's just a lot that goes on with Max, to be honest. And then you're getting resources conditional on if you already boosted. Like there's a lot of turn mapping. I found that deck infinitely harder to play than Tekla Vossen.
Yeah, well, it's just less fundamental fab. That's why I think. Should we talk Dash quickly? Yeah,
quickly. I want to ask you a question before we lead in, which is, do you feel like, I know you get to play Dash, so maybe it's an unfair question, but how do you feel about the galvanize keyword now? Because it was one of those things where in the set review we kind of walked it back, like, okay, maybe you said you had overrated a bit. Do you feel like it's more powerful or on par with just having 3 blocks in your deck, or do you think the 3 blocks are better?
No, I think Galvanize is better. I think you talked me down, and I'm sad that I didn't stay true to my grades on Galvanize. I think Galvanize is kind of nutty, especially the rares. So Ratchet Up, Soup Up, really good. Torque Tuned is, this is a 2 for 6 that you can make sure you get Overpower on. Like this is the kind of finisher you want in Max. Pair this with a pump to come in for 10 off 3 cards with Overpower is exactly what you want. So no, I think Galvanize, especially at the rare slot where these have okay, the Galvanize keyword. Okay, the rares are nuts because Galvanize is also really good, but the Galvanize keyword itself is still really good. But you want to make sure if your card, so let's look at something like Infused Alloy, which is the 0 for 4 and 0 for 3. Yeah, and it blocks 2. Like if you're going to play this card in your deck and you're, say it's like the yellow one or the blue one, like you do need to make sure that you can get Galvanized value for it to be better than a 3 block. So a lot of the time and a lot of decks people just throw this in, and it's going to be worse than a 3 block. I will agree on that. But the Galvanized keyword is really powerful, and there is oftentimes, like especially if you've got these items that like, you get the trigger off them, so something like the scripts, and then they're just going to sit around until they die on your next turn. Like these are the cards that you just like you get to free roll the Galvanized trigger on and have a 4 block. Plus, you also already got the ability of the item. Even your hyperdriver that's got 1 counter left on it. Like often that 1 resource for the 2 block, you don't need the 1 resource in your next turn is going to be really, really powerful. So good value anyway.
Yeah, one thing I noticed with my Max opponents, I felt like they weren't doing enough was distributing the hyperdriver, not cranky at distributing it over 2 turns. Because when they did that, when they got that effectively free in like the end of a combat chain, that felt scary. I was like, okay, now I'm facing this additional resource each turn. And maybe even on that's not the turn after, but the turn after that, they have another hyperdriver. They've done the same thing and they're doing 2 extra resources. That's when it got scary. A card that I really like, you mentioned Infused Alloy. I actually like Infused Titanium a lot. It's just kind of
that card's really good.
Yeah. It's kind of not for the Galvanized reason, but I just think that 2 card 7 is pretty good. If you have a couple of these in your deck, it's just like, I'm not blocking with this card. Like I like 2 card 7. Like I like blocking and then 2 card 7.
You're a awesome player.
Yeah, I just
it is good.
I like it.
The Galvanized is relevant.
Yeah, it's not irrelevant.
In decks outside. In Tekla Vossen, it's just 2 card 7. In Dash and Max, it's like this good way to play intermediary turns of like just 2 card 7 while you're kind of getting stuff set up or looking for items or whatever. But also sometimes you're like, no, I just get Galvanized value out of this as well, and it's really good. So yeah, that card is great. Infused Titanium. I think that card is like, I think we gave it a B already in our set review. And I think that card is like a really easy first pickable card in this format.
I can see that for sure. Yeah. I think that, even if you're playing this Tekla Vossen deck, you just kind of follow the Wounded Bull philosophy, which is you just don't block with this card. You just attack with this card, which is not a huge ask. Like it's pretty reasonable. All right, on to Dash. Onto Dash.io. Yeah, I know that's weird because I feel like a couple of years ago that wasn't fundamental fab, and now it feels literally infused to every single way I look at anything in this game. It's like, yeah. All right, funny.
Dash. I think Dash is the one I have least experience with. So I'm speaking about this from putting some pools together, and then I got to play a couple of games, but not actually the pre-release itself, and then also just what my opponents were doing and what friends were doing. I think this is going to be the one that people play the least because I think you do it's harder to build. Like your pool has to be leaning in this way really particularly, I think. So you do really need some good items and items that are powerful. So items like Boom Grenade, items like some of the scripts, I honestly really think you need one of the rare items that loop, particularly steam canister or fuel injector. I think it's really, because then obviously you get the action on the point on your weapon, the counter, and then you can just loop it and keep doing it, because otherwise you run out of ways to attack with your weapon, run out of items. But if you have these items, obviously you can keep looping them. And then beyond the kind of items piece of it, so looking for these good items, backup protocols are really good, by the way, as well, because they just get you back your best cards and also trigger your weapon. So they do amazing. Like I think we gave that card like a D grade. We're so wrong. Like that card is like minimum like a C, and I think in a lot of like max it's like C plus even, and then in dash it's like a B. But beyond that, then you are just looking for ways to really efficiently put some turns together. So all of the cards that we just talked about that trade well, you talked about Infused Titanium, for instance, all the Galvanized cards are really good to trade value. But then you are looking for, some ways to potentially push some bigger turns, and those can be through boosting. They also can be through overpower, same as before, or just with like setting up some item value that can push damage is definitely a way you can do it.
What do you think about that heuristic that you generally don't want to be activating Dash's ability on your opponent's turn? You feel that still holds true?
Yeah, a lot of the time you're not going to want to be doing that.
Committing an entire card.
But it is once per turn, so sometimes it's going to be correct to do it.
How do you feel about the block
found that
cards? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It just reminded me of Kano. It's often just a trap to be Kano during your opponent's turn.
Yes, it is. How do you feel about the block cards? Cards like Teclonetic Force Field. You mentioned overpower being really powerful. How do you feel about a card like that? This Mechanologist block card.
I think they're really good. I think Firewall's obviously the really good one, right?
Yeah.
The 0/4, but Force Field's great. I think that's the kind of card that like Teklavossen's going to want to have in its deck somewhere against Overpower in the late game, for instance. Like I had one of my sealed deck of Teklavossen, it just felt so good to just hold that, like cycle it or hold it into the late game, for instance. Obviously it's harder because it's red, right? But the good ones are red anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But even like the blue ones, right? Because you can block, it means you can block with 2 cards.
Yep.
Because it's the only cards that aren't actions or equipment or both, is really important. So, like the blue galvanized one, for instance, can do some really important stuff late game where your opponent's like, okay, you're on 6, here's my 9 power overpower card. You're like, okay, well, I'll block with my blue card for 2 or 3, or even 1, and then my card for 3 and survive. It's pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to end with, I think that Dash, end with a little spice, pissing people off. I think Dash IO is the weakest here on Sealed, by quite a margin for a few reasons. Not that if you have the busted Dash deck that you can't win, or that it can't be powerful, but I think that you are jumping through the most hoops and you're incurring the most risk when deck building in order to play a Dash deck. And I think that it's in a sense quite a bit outclassed by the power floor of a deck like Teklavossen, which is not running 0 block item cards, and which is not trying to do anything, at least not much synergy based. Even Max, like the floor deck of that, I think is really tough for a lot of Dash IO decks. I think that the ceiling on Dash IO, it's definitely there. They can do some busted stuff, but ultimately I think that is the hardest hero to build and, probably the weakest overall.
It reminds me of Lexi and Tales of Aria Sealed. Like you really had to open a particular sealed
it was good in draft,
yeah.
Yeah,
but
might be the case
really
here.
Good draft. I think so. There's also just last thing on Dash is like the Evo Data Mine, Evo Battery Pack, Cog Spitter, and Charging Rods. The 0 for 2 at yellow equipment line is really good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you find Evos in non-Teklavossen decks? Are you playing them consistently?
Well, those in particular are really good in Dash. I think those are the premium ones. And then just some of like the block value ones are fine because you are able to kind of, especially ones that cost 2, because you can pitch your blue, pay 1 for your item, pay 2 for your, 1 for your 0 cost item, pay 2 off the top, pay 2 for your equipment, and still be able to do an attack because you got the extra action point. So I quite like the 2 cost ones and the 0 cost line. The 3 cost ones are a lot more awkward though in Dash, for instance. And then in Max, like honestly, like the instant one that kind of like gives you the instant arms that can give you like a +1 attack is like really good for like combat tricks. But otherwise, like Evo's not something I'm particularly excited about.
Well, let me tell you about one that's fucked in Max. And it's called Evo Atom Breaker. It's a Majestic. It says if you have a base chest equipped, transform it and X hyperdrive you control to this, then equip this. If you do, the next time you dealt damage, prevent twice of X that damage. Well, I'll tell you don't really do the first part because you block with some Battle Worn one if you've opened it. But here you go. Whenever you boost, you may what? You may destroy a card under this. If you do, gain 2 resources. So my Max opponent got 4 resources out of this card. It was absolutely freaking disgusting. Plus the Battle Worn equipment, which they put under this before combat chain resolution. Holy shit! That in limited was just like, it was just ridiculous. It was absolutely crazy. I think one thing we circle back to limited review. We didn't add a lot of nuance in terms of, how to rate like each Evo, like what, they were all of a similar grade. I think it's hard. It was hard without context, but what do you feel, in your opinion, Hayden, are the most powerful Evos? Like which one are you, under the Majestic slot are you trying to open?
I was going to say, look at the arms. Obviously you have to have like hyperdrive and non-tokens in play.
I know, they're so, dude, just like they are bombs. Like, I mean, I just could not believe the amount of value my opponent got off this single card. It was just absolutely disgusting.
Must be nice.
Yes.
I mean, there's no one answer. I think it's super contextual on the hero. Like that's the thing. I think people are maybe overlooking the Sentry base pieces, the ones that are both base and non-base. What is that? Like the Evos and bases at common, the rear line that costs 2. I think those are particularly good in both Dash and of course Deckbuilding. But yeah, I don't know. Like I don't think there's any particular one. I mean, the ones that impressed me the most were the instant ones. I thought they were going to be only okay, and they were a lot better than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, I feel like there was something that my opponent did that allowed them to play Evo Atom Breaker at instant speed as well. I just can't remember what card it was, unless they cheated, but I don't think they did. I think there was there's another piece of the puzzle that I'm missing there. But yeah, that card is crazy. But you mentioned
I didn't particularly like the smooth bore engine room ones, the yellow ones, the rare ones. They were fine. They're definitely good in Tickler Blossom, but and they block 3, which is fine. But for instance, I saw people playing them in their max deck, and I was like, I don't know if this is what you want to be doing here. I think this is a waste of a card slot in your deck.
These cards are great for scrapping. I mean, scrapping.
For sure, yeah.
That's why the thing is the scrapping these in Tickler Blossom. The Evo based stuff felt really good. Like the reds, because those are just, it's just so much block value. And the ones that I opened the most of were the Evo, Data Mine, Battery Pack, Cogspitter, those ones, the 0 cost.
I loved Cogwork Base Arm in Max. That was probably one of my standout equipment.
Yep.
To just be like, okay, attack, and then the turn where they only have 1 card left to block my weapon. Okay, pay 1, come in for 4, get the trigger.
Yep, acknowledges attack, does include the weapon. Yep. All right. Hayden, I think that concludes our thoughts on Sealed. I just want to hop into draft real quick. Draft is something that.
Can I ask you one question before draft though? Yep. I want to ask you just an overall thought on this limited design of the set.
Sealed, or how do you want to evaluate it?
just the design in general. So there's this being a 1 class set, and there being some redundancy in cards, or at least perceived redundancy. What is your take so far on just this being a monoclass format, and do the heroes and the cards that you want in the heroes feel different enough, or do you think you need to reserve judgment until you've done some drafts?
So I think the path where I diverge from you a bit in terms of limited deck building and choices, that I think that it is 80-20, 80-20, baby. 80-20 correct to literally just crack shuffle, play your packs, and then take out yellows and items most of the time. I think that you will have playable decks in Max, you'll have playable decks in Teklevossen. And when it comes to Dash, you just kind of switch some of the methodology there, right? You're just cutting more yellows and adding more items in, I think, a lot of the time. But Dash, of course, is a balance of how many items you play, etc. I think that if you look at this set, and you look at the additional rules that were added onto it, where it's 30 card minimum, 40 card maximum, I think that feels more like an ad hoc kind of design flaw to an extent. I think if that was the rule for sealed going forward, it would make more sense. But that being the sort of additional layer that is not normal to Flesh and Blood sealed, but exists in the set, feels a bit weird to me. I think that I would have preferred the set to, maybe exist without that additional ruling that you have to be reminded of. Because, fast forward like a year, 6 months, year, 2 years, people pick up these packs, they want to play limited. It's like, oh yeah, there's a special little rule for that format. I think that felt a little weird for me.
It's a change.
Yeah.
It's a sealed.
It's permanent. Okay, interesting. Yeah, okay, so okay. I want that change. That changes how I thought it was just for the. I didn't know if it was just for the set or it was moving forward, but that makes more sense.
Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I'm
wrong.
pretty sure that they'd snuck that in as a change to the rules.
I will say that some of the critiques of the set that you see on Twitter with some of the maybe homogeny between cards, because they do look similar, right? They're both 2 for 5. One has ability, one doesn't. They have boost. I don't think that that's a fair critique of the limited format or the design of the format. And I think ultimately, although it is a single class format, the different decks are drastically different. I do find myself, when I don't have the Evos for Tekla-Vossen, I do think that that is usually a max deck. Like that will just kind of become a max deck more often than not. But I do think you are making decisions between which hero you want to play. That being said, I do think that sometimes the decision is overshadowed by how powerful Tekla-Vossen with Evos can be. I do think that Evos are the most powerful thing, and especially when you're banishing them and playing them and scrapping them and playing them, I think that is the strongest thing you can do. In Sealed, there are going to be power levels that exceed that in both Dash and Max if you have the absolute nuts of cards, but overall, Evos seem like they have too much modality for me. Like, there's not a lot of downside, Hayden. You can block with them, you can banish them, you can scrap them, and you can get a bonus. It's like that whole concept just breaks the paradigms of a lot of the other cards that exist in the set, where that you're jumping through hoops, and you're not jumping through hoops there.
Okay. Not really the question I asked, but that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I got lost, Sometimes I start talking, I get dizzy, and then who knows?
You just get so excited about Tekla-Vossen, I think. I guess, and you did kind of answer it a little bit at the start, which is just, I just wanted your kind of view on, I guess, like...
It's as good as it gets,
Just kind of, this homogeny of cards, and like, do they feel different enough? And I agree with you on Seal. I think, you're going to Tekla-Vossen, you're going to Max, you're very rarely going to Dash. But... looking forward to draft. It's going to be really interesting to see how different I felt. So my take from the Seal format of the weekend is that I was pleasantly surprised to a degree on like how important certain cards felt. I think that was like, there was a lot of cards that felt like they were more or less important, less good, worse, for instance, or better in certain decks, certain heroes than others. I was hoping to see a bit more of a spike of that. I think it felt like, if we use our grading, for instance, it's like some cards in a certain deck for like a C minus. They felt like maybe a B minus in other decks. I really wanted some cards that were like amazing in some heroes, but just like utterly unplayable in others. And I don't think those particularly existed. And that's what I was really hoping for when I talk about the homogeny of the format and the kind of solo class format. And that might be different in draft. We might see that, right? I did talk about Hyperdrive, for instance, feeling kind of, as Brendan Patrick would say, ass in Tekla-Vossen, but really good in Max, like insane in Max. So it's, and even Dash.
Hydrogen Collider as well. It kind of falls into that in terms of in a Max. And how did you feel about the bottom right hand corner and how that played into what cards you were putting into your deck? This is I think this is a more fair critique that people, but this might, honestly, for people listening, this might be a critique you're going to have for Flesh and Blood sets forever, in perpetuity, in the future, because I'm sorry, but the collective Flesh and Blood mind has just woken up to how powerful just strict numbers are. Unconditional, right? Like, there's conditional numbers where you have to jump through a hoop, like +4 in your defense, but there's also just blood. So, Hayden, your thoughts. How did you feel about the bottom right-hand, the number in the bottom right-hand corner, and how it sort of influenced your deck building on what cards went into your deck?
I just want to do this one quickly, I think. I think it depends on, again, what hero you're playing. I think if you're just looking at the bottom right-hand corner and you're playing anything other than Tekla-Vossen, you're in for a bad time. Even if you're playing Tekla-Vossen, you still might be in for a bad time. Like, if you're just putting yellows in your deck that block 3, like, if you're not blocking them for 3, they're going to do absolutely trash all. And I don't know, if I'm seeing my opponent playing all these bad yellow block 3s, I'm going to make sure I take advantage of, like, my turns and make sure I'm like using like setup turns and things like that to punish them for playing these bad cards, because they play them offensively. They just suck. Well, not all of them obviously, but there's an element of that. So the bottom right hand matters to a degree, but I think the text on the card and the overall composition of your deck. Like, this is a synergy format, and I think we're going to see that a lot more in draft. It's harder in sealed because you get what you open. There's 4 packs as opposed to the 3 packs, and you get to pick what you want to a degree. Yeah, I just think the bottom right corner might be a little bit overstated this first weekend.
One last question. I know you said you're going to do it quick. How often do you find that the cards that you're cutting are yellow cards? Is that what makes up most of the cards that are getting taken out of your deck?
Yeah, for sure. It is. I would agree with you on that. But there is good yellow cards I want to make sure in my deck. So if they're synergistic, or they have a way that I can combine them with another card, so synergy, I guess. But or they have like things like overpower on them, for instance. Like those cards are going to stay in my deck. But yeah, if it's like a yellow boost card, for instance, like I probably don't want that. It doesn't have any particular synergy with what I'm trying to do with the rest of my deck. Like yellow boost cards, for the most part, seem kind of a bad in seal.
Yeah, and I feel like the issue, or I guess the pain point of yellow cards is just it's a lot more palpable in this format than it is in other formats because you have less choice in other formats where you might be you're more sort of pigeonholed to a specific hero and you just have to play those yellow cards. In this format, it does feel like because you have more cards, every card is playable. The cards you're usually subbing out are yellows, and just by design, yellows in Flesh and Blood tend to be they're the worst of all worlds, right? They're usually not as good as the blue counterparts or red counterparts. All right, Hayden, draft. Give me your thoughts on where you think the format will land for Bright Light's draft. What heroes you think will be powerful? Do you think that we're going to see an echo of Monarch draft here, where the very powerful deck in sealed, very powerful floor deck in sealed, like Prism, but in this case, Deckbuilding will sort of persist over to the draft format? And how do you see the other 2 heroes landing as well?
Oh, this is so hard. I think this format being solo class makes it really hard to evaluate, I think, because we just don't have anything to base this off. So I think, this is going to be some really top level stuff, I think, to end the pod here on first thoughts on draft. I'm going to have a lot more thoughts next week after doing a couple of drafts this weekend. Haven't been able to draft so far. Until we get hands on the set. But I think to a degree, there's a risk that could happen. I think the reason why it might not happen, like we've seen in Monarch with Prism, is that the fundamental kind of like power level of the cards you put in your deck aren't above rate. So there is this Evo game plan, and you have this kind of like work towards of your weapon. But like fundamentally, the problem with like I think Prism and draft was like so many of the cards you put in your deck were just over rate, and then you also had these kind of bomby cards that were reminiscent of Evos. A card like Red Prismatic Shield, for instance, is reminiscent of what the Evos can kind of do with like the right setup. But then you also had Heralds, right? And you had Spears of Surreality, and you had these kind of cards as well. Plus you had generics. You could just put good generics in your deck. You don't have that in this set, so it feels a bit different. But I guess it's really going to come to how many Evos are at the table, what that kind of looks like, what cards people can put in their max and dash decks. I think basically what it's going to come down to for me is like, if we're sitting at a level right now and Teklavossen is like, what's the difference between the sealed Teklavossen and the draft Teklavossen decks versus the draft max and dash decks and the sealed max dash decks? And I think the delta between the max and dash decks sealed to draft is going to be a lot higher. Like they're going to get significantly better. The Teklavossen deck, I think, is going to get better. To what degree? I think it's going to be smaller. And also the other thing is like you're going to get 45 cards in this. There's 42 cards in this, right? You're not really going to be able to play 40 cards like you can in sealed. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, I don't think it's going to play out the same way. Like people's decks are going to be fundamentally more powerful. So is fatigue still going to be a thing?
Yeah.
It's different.
As my follow-up question was
boost. Boost is still relevant, right? So it's a little bit different to Monarch, where it's like, and sealed fatigue could have been kind of relevant, or even in Tails, but in draft, a little bit different, right? So it's a really tough one.
I'm interested to see how fatigue and just these sort of high value strategies, right? They're consisting of a lot of block 3 cards, blue and red cards, and then your 2 card 7s. If those strategies, like the players that really force that, maybe get up to that 38, 40 playable cards that are, blocking for 3, they're attacking for reasonable values, if they are just out trading the opponents that were left with like 5 items, or maybe they're playing dash, or maybe they're playing max. Because I do think that it's very possible that there will be a player or a couple players at the pod that end up with a lot more playable cards than others. Or at least, there's going to be a Teclovossin that has 3 blue items in their deck. It depends if people are playing 30 or playing more, but I think there'll be some 38, 40 card decks floating around, and you're going to need strategies to beat that. Well, it's draft. There's tons of evasion in the set. There's overpower, Evo upgrade, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how the draft format lands, especially in the context of how many cards are going into your deck.
Yep. The other thing I want to point out is 3 hero versus 4 hero.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this going back to 3 hero draft is going to be very interesting into the dynamic of what that draft looks like. I think 3 hero draft sets are just more interesting in terms of the dynamic between how many people end up in each hero. I don't find it. I think in theory I was always like 4 feels better. The 2-2-2 split feels really good. But let's be honest, like the heroes aren't always balanced, right? Like there's always some degree, even if it's a small degree, of like which heroes play easier or draft better, for instance. So I like that split. I think that makes it more interesting. I think that, and especially in a monoclass format where there's homogeny, but there is also cards that you do want in particular decks, items for dash, for instance, hyperdriver interaction and crank interaction for max. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see where that kind of split lands. My first gut instinct is people are going to come off the back of sealed, and you're going to see mostly like 3 and 4 Teclovossin. But I think a lot of draft pods are going to be like 3 max, 3 Teclovossin, 2 dash all the time. And it's going to be interesting to see if that split, what that looks like really. I think just kind of to close out, maybe we can just like talk about some of like the cards that we're looking to pick up early. If you're trying to stay open in this format, which is what I think I'm going to do early on. Like I think Evos are good, and I will like look to take some early, but like I only want the ones that are good in 2 decks. I think like I'm not just going to blindly take an Evo early pick, right? Because especially if it's one that is only good in Teclovossin, I think. Whereas the ones that are good in the instant ones, or the 2-cost yellow ones that are good in both Teclovossin and dash / max, I'm into. But what I'm really like looking at is some of these like galvanize cards that have good payoff, or some of the items that go into every deck, maybe something like a backup protocol. I'm looking at cards that just like a good rate. Your Wounded Bulls, the format, your Titans, the Galvanized Titan, the Hydraulic Press, Junkyard Dog. Like these are the kind of the cards. Soup Up, I think in particular. These are kind of the cards I'm looking at early as
Big Bertha. Big Bertha, I don't know, it's just very uncommittal.
Big Bertha's fine.
It's fine, right? It's just, it depends how open you're trying to stay.
Yeah.
But, like,
I'd rather take a card that has more upside, like a Junkyard Dog, for instance.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that, Junkyard Dog is maybe
or
just
Scrap
better.
Harvester.
Yeah,
Whatever.
I'm trying to think if like Infused Titanium is just strictly better, even though it doesn't have the possibility of the go again.
Well, it's not even the possibility. It's just like it's like a 2 for 6, but then in a deck like Teclovossin or a deck like Dash, you just get this crazy scrap value as well. So
yeah, I'm really interested to see where the power level of Dash.io lands. Because I think what would make it not interesting is if Dash is just not a good deck because it gets run over by Max and gets outvalued by Teclovossin. And then we end up in a format where, there might be one Dash player, but then the rest of the items are just kind of they're like the throwaway cards for the Max decks, and the Teclovossin decks get left with them on the last picks of the pack. I don't think that's where it's going to land, but that's my sort of like, let's go see weekend 1. I want to see where Dash.io lands, because that makes the format more interesting.
I kind of just want to go into my first draft and just force Dash.
Yeah.
But I'm drafting with Sasha. So on Sunday.
Sasha's a really nice, friendly card game player that...
yeah, but he's obsessed with Dash, so he'll probably do the same.
Nah, he won't. He's going to draft Teclovossin. He thinks it's broken. He's told... like,
sell out.
Yeah. It's just... It's on the power level of some other things that have transitioned from sealed to draft performance. It's just the modality of Evos is nothing, in my opinion, compares. Not in terms of like nothing can be as powerful. There aren't decks that can compete with it, but there aren't other cards in the set that just do all of those things so well, where it's like you block with it, it's great, you free roll it, you banish it, it's great, you free roll with it, you block it, then you scrap. It's just like, and you can still play from hand. It's like, what the hell? Like, why? We can do literally everything with these.
I do think overpower cards are obviously really high on the pick list as well. Like I'm probably, if I see a good red overpower card at pack on pick 1, I'm probably snapping.
Yeah, I think that is a strategy that's going to shine through in draft. That was more of a sort of secondhand thing in sealed, where it's like if you had the overpower card, maybe that was part of your win condition, maybe it wasn't. But it wasn't like your primary game plan, where in draft you could really sort of second cycle for the primary game plan there. We'll see.
Cool.
Anyway, Evo Upgrade I think is going to get a lot better too. Those cards are so broken. I mean, Liquid Cooled Mayhem, like what the fuck? It's crazy.
I think Artillery is
it is. Artillery is the busted one because I mean, you talk about the floor of Artillery, it's like that's just a good card. Like the floor of Artillery is a good card, and then the ceiling is like, unblockable 6 almost. Anyway, Hayden, anything else to close out with for the week?
No, there's going to be a lot of thoughts, I think, and just need to get some hands on cards. I'm also trying to play Classic Constructor to get ready for Taipei next weekend.
Yeah. Probably playing Jeremiah.
Well, probably. I mean, I really wanted to play a mech deck, to be honest. I think Dash, like base Dash, just OG Dash is really good with the upgrades of cards like Twin Drive, etc. There's some other good upgrades for you to play as well. Would love to play, like a Dash IO, for instance, but I don't think that's happening. So there's like an outside chance I play Dash. Otherwise, I'm probably just defaulting, to be honest, to Jeremiah.
All right. Well, let us know what you think of the format in the YouTube comments below. Interested to hear your thoughts on how you think that this will transition from sealed into draft. I mean, sealed is sort of a temporary format. I mean, we'll see if we see more callings with sealed and then draft at day 2. But ultimately, the way we evaluate a limited set in Flesh and Blood is via the draft experience. So let us know how you think Bright Lights will transition into that. If you're listening to this podcast on audio platforms, there's a video version on YouTube at youtube.com/ArsenalPass. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps us out the most. Number one thing you can do for Arsenal Pass if you're a fan. And of course, you can hit like, subscribe while on YouTube. Other than that, we're on Twitter, BrendanAPG, Finn_Dale. And we will see you all next week.